Mara came to work before the crowd. The museum sat alone on the plain, like a quiet promise. Glass walls rose from stone. Inside those walls was a containment, a sealed habitat with old rooms and older things. The sign said, "Here live the last humans. Study them, remember them, never repeat." People read the signs and walked on. Every morning Mara checked the seals and the displays. She was the youngest curator, but she knew the rules better than most. She walked each hall with a small tablet and a careful mind. The containment had been closed for generations. People learned from its things. They talked about fear and treaties, and mistakes from a time no one wanted to repeat. For Mara, every object was a fact. A fact could not move. Facts were safe. Today a trade fleet had sent a large group. They came in noisy ships and silver coats. Children were among them. They ran with bright shoes and loud questions. Guides took them in slow lines. Cameras hovered and clicked. The museum smelled of cool air and old metal. Visitors moved like they expected nothing to surprise them. Mara led the group into Hall 7. The containment sat in the center, like a frozen scene. A bicycle leaned against a wall. A small shoe rested on a plinth. A faded poster hung at a tilt. The guide spoke softly about treaties and containment and the reason the galaxy had locked one species away. The visitors listened. They asked the safe questions. They wanted to know how the past became a lesson. A little girl stood at the front. She was no taller than the plinth that held the shoe. She pressed her face to the glass and tapped with a small finger. The tap made a clean ring. In the hall, the sound bounced once and then died. The girl smiled. Her mother pulled a tablet and took a picture for a memory. Mara watched the child and felt a small warmth. Most people did not touch the glass. They kept their hands at a safe distance. The containment taught caution. It taught the galaxy to look without getting close. Mara felt proud of that lesson. She did not expect anything to change. The glass gave a sound back. At first, it was only a low hum under the museum speakers, something thin and long like a bell. People shifted but kept listening to the guide. The hum grew into a thin crackling, like a wire heating. One of the old lights inside the containment blinked. Shadows moved where no one expected. A sheet on a chair trembled, as if someone had turned in sleep. An old guide with silver hair stood at the back. He had worked at the museum for 30 years. He made a small sound in his throat, a noise like old metal. He checked his tablet. The seals read clean. Sensors said no life. The computer showed, all inert. No activity detected. The tablet lied in plain light. Mara kept her voice steady. She told the visitors about treaties and the long peace. She pointed at the shoe and spoke of small children and the strange choices of a dangerous species. Her words felt thin when the hall hummed. The girl at the glass tapped again. This time the mark on the inside fogged for a second where her finger touched. The fog did not match the outside. It came from the other side of the glass and faded in small lines. People leaned forward. Someone whispered. Cameras caught the spot. Mara stepped closer because her job was to keep calm. She checked the inner pane with a small scanner. The public feed did not show life. The museum sensors returned clean values. The inner cameras gave only shadows and still things. Still things do not make fog. A smear like a fingertip appeared on the inside. It looked wet, as if someone had rubbed breath against the glass. The shape was not right for dust. It was fresh. The crowd grew quiet like a wave finding the shore. The young girl pressed her small palm to the outside. For a single beat, 2 palms almost lined up on either side of the glass. From inside came the smallest sound. It was not a noise the guide could name. It might have been wind. It might have been a computer settling. But it held a weight that took the breath from some listeners. It sounded like a human breath. The security lights flashed once on Mara's console. A tiny red dot blinked there, a quiet error, a file saved under anomaly. No one in the hall noticed the dot. They noticed the glass in the fog and the small print that had not been there a moment before. The old guide put a hand to his chest and said nothing. He had seen warnings long ago, and he did not want to be the one to make them real again. Mara felt her throat tighten. protocol meant calm words and locked doors and messages to council. She could call it in and watch the world fold into old fears. Or she could keep the crowd safe and search the footage while they believed in the lesson she had taught them. A camera in the hall kept recording. It rolled slow frames of a museum full of people who came to see a thing they thought could not touch them. The camera caught the girl in the smear. It caught Mara's face, pale and small. It saved a sound so quiet the feed barely picked it up. In the inner dark, the faint fog on the glass started to clear from the center outward. The smear stayed like an imprint on memory. Someone in the crowd began to clap, a soft, uncertain sound meant to break the quiet. Others only watched. Mara wrote the anomaly code into the log and sent it to the archive. She labeled it with a small word, possible human contact. The red light on her console kept blinking small and slow. No one outside the control room saw it. They saw only glass, a child's shoe, and a small print that did not belong. A breath came again from inside the containment. This time it was closer to sound. It rose like a question. The hall fell into a different quiet, the kind that waits for an answer it is not sure it wants. Mara did not know what the answer would bring. She only knew that the containment, built to hold history, had looked back. The museum that taught the galaxy to look away had found something that wanted to be seen. Mara did not sleep well the night after the fog print. The hall lights hummed in her dreams. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the small shoe on its plinth and the girl's palm pressed to the glass. She woke early and went back to the control room. The museum felt different in the blue light of morning. It held its breath. The surveillance wall blinked with tiny squares. Cameras watched every corner of the containment day and night. Most boxes showed the same calm scenes, a chair, a poster, a bicycle that would not move. But Mara stopped when one small feed flicked strangely. The frame cut and then returned with a different angle. The timestamp slid a half-second. The image showed only shadow, then nothing. The camera was old, reported broken for years. It should not have shown anything new. Mara played the clip. She watched the shadow like someone reading a line of handwriting. The shadow moved across a shelf and paused by a small jar. For a moment, the jar looked like it had been pushed. Mara rewound and watched the tiny motion again. The feed broke into static and then resumed a second later. The clip ended with a smear on the glass that looked like breath. Her heart beat faster. She opened the archive and searched old tapes. The containment had many cameras, some digital, some stored on cold film. She pored through hours while the public tours circled and asked old questions. Most tapes showed nothing. The containment had been designed to hold things still. But several tapes, long labeled as corrupted or irrelevant, now showed small movements. A toy tilting, a shadow passing a window, a light shifting where it should not. Mara called Mrs. Halvo, the night guard who had first sent the jittered note. The woman answered on the second ring, voice low and tired. "I told you," Mrs. Halvo said. "I saw something by the second corridor. I felt a draft. The glass was warm like breath. I thought I imagined it. Then the marks. Did you see a head? A hand?" Mara asked quietly. "No face," Mrs. Halvo said, "but a shape. It turned its head like an animal might. It didn't run. It watched." Mara thanked her and closed the call. She felt the line of fear move in the room, like a thin, cold wind. A museum is a place for answers, Mara told herself. She was paid to find truth and keep stories tidy. But the truth had begun to slide. She checked the old bioreaders stored in the lab. Those devices had once measured life signs before the council had silenced them to keep visitors calm. The readings had become a political problem once. A heartbeat in an empty room was more than a fact. Still, Mara asked permission to run one probe. Quietly and alone. The council had mandated no live readings, but Jalen had once shown her how to use a private tool that did not report data to the main grid. She found a small handheld probe in a dusty box and turned it on. The probe had a soft green glow. Mara moved it along the glass where the smear had shown. The screen blinked, heat low, then a pulse, 0.8. The meter dropped, 0.6, then nothing. Mara held her breath until the meter gave a second pulse. small and regular, like a distant drum. It faded again. She pressed the probe closer. The line trembled and stayed quiet. The probe's reading could be noise. Old machines died with strange ticks, but the pulse had come twice. The memory of it lodged in her like a small nail. At noon, a crowd pressed the outer gates. Word had moved from the museum feeds to the street channels. People came with placards and songs and cameras. Mara could not let the public area see the control room. She shut certain feeds from the public stream. Tours continued in Hall 7 as if nothing had changed. Visitors still asked the safe questions that made adults sigh, with the ease of stories that end the same way. Mara watched them through the silent glass of her monitors and felt the shape of two worlds, one safe and told, the other raw and new. She called Jalen. He arrived in a sleep-gray jacket and a bag of old parts. He watched the footage with a small smile that turned to a hard line when he saw the probe data. They turned the live sensors off a long time ago, he said. But someone left crumbs in the system. Old cameras, old tapes. They did not like being silent when someone is awake. Jalen set up a slow replay on a high-definition screen. They watched an old camera labeled South Corner, mislabeled, forgotten, never shown to guests. For hours it had a black frame. Then at 3:17 it came alive. The feed showed only a patch of floor and a small shadow. The shadow rose like a hand. It moved slowly across the shelf and paused before a glass jar. It stretched a thin shape toward the window. Mara reached for the play button. The shadow's form sharpened. For a single frame, the camera caught fingers press a glass, the skin darker in the backlight. The movement was so small, it could be a trick of light. Yet the motion matched the smear on the public camera and the pulse on the probe. "Pause," Jalen said softly. He zoomed into the frame. The fingers had a length no tool would make. They curved like someone waiting. The camera captured the angle of the palm as if it had brushed the surface from the inside. The image lasted only a fraction of a second. Then the feed stuttered back into static. Mara felt cold and a wild, bright fear at the same time. She thought of the child's shoe and the small palm on the outside. If someone or something inside knew how to press its hand to glass, it knew how to be seen. It also knew how to wait. They saved the clip to a hidden file labeled South Anomaly. Mara wrote a short note into the log, possible life sign, intermittent. Recommend controlled read and counsel notice. Her hands shook as she typed. If the council learned before she had proof, they would close the hall and erase the footage. If she leaked the clip, the city would flood the museum with people in panic. She chose to hold the file. She and Jalen watched the feed one more time. The shadow moved toward the glass and rested there. The fingers flattened like a slow, soft seal. For a moment it felt like a greeting. For others it could be a trap. Above them, in Hall 7, a guide finished a sentence about treaties, and a small child asked, "Did they sing?" The guide laughed and said something to make the child quiet. Cameras filmed the smiles. The public show went on. On Mara's screen, the shadow's palm stayed pressed to glass. The frame held the image like a photograph in a tight hand. Outside, the city argued about openings and laws. Inside, the containment answered with a simple, patient gesture. Jalen closed his eyes for a second. "We either learn to listen," he said, "or we keep making museums for the dead." He did not finish the sentence. Mara knew what he meant. The containment might be a record, or it might be a wrong that still breathed. The hidden clip saved and blinked in the archive. It would be the thing that changed everything if anyone chose to watch. For now, Mara kept it private like a key. She walked back to the hall and stood where the child had pressed her palm. She placed her own hand on the glass and felt nothing more than cold. Still, for a second in her mind, she felt the faintest pulse, like ocean over a shell. It faded, but the idea it left did not. Crowds came faster than anyone expected. A short clip from the control room had leaked. A shaky view of a small hand on the inside of the glass. It spread across channels and feeds. People replayed it until it felt like a truth everyone knew. Ships that had only come for trade stayed. Loudspeakers filled the square with music and slogans. The museum gates could not hold the noise. Two groups formed quickly. The liberators carried bright banners. "Open the past." They wanted containment opened. They said lying behind glass was wrong. The guardians held heavy shields and wore quiet faces. They chanted, "Containment saves many." They feared what humans had once done. Both sides shouted. Both sides fed the cameras. Mara watched from the control room. Her hands knew the buttons and the protocols. Papers lined her desk with lists of steps to take if trouble came. Now the lists were not enough. Her tablet buzzed with messages from the council, from old colleagues, from friends. Some said to close all feeds and lock everything. Others said to let the world watch, to show proof and move on. Her boss called first. He used careful words. "We must not act on rumor," he said. "Keep order. The council will decide." But his voice shook. He wanted a safe ending as much as anyone. Mara thought of the child's shoe and the small breath that had come from inside the containment. She thought of the old guide who had worked 30 years and the late-night clip with the shadowed hand. She could lock the files and send a report, or she could let people see and risk the city burning on old fears. At the front gate, the crowd grew bold. A young man from the Liberators climbed a low wall and spoke into a megaphone. His voice was full and raw. "They kept history behind glass," he said. "They kept truth from us. We will not let them hide what they did." The crowd cheered and surged. The guardians formed a line, shields tight. The police hovered between them, unsure which side to push. Someone from the Liberators tried to cut the outer ring, the non-essential seal that kept weather out but did not hold the real lock. They thought breaking it would be a show, a symbol of taking back truth. They did not plan very far. Mara watched the live feed. A young woman climbed a ladder and reached for the seam. Her hands were steady. The night looked like a stage light on her face. Security drones turned toward her and hovered, orange lights like eyes. She cut a thin slice of the seal. A small alarm whispered. A crowd gasped. Cameras pointed. In the containment, something moved like an answered question. From inside the inner pane, a small shape rose. It matched the young woman's motion, as if someone watched and copied. Slow and careful, like repeating a child's game. The crowd below could not see the inner figure clearly. The public cameras showed only the smear and the light. But a hidden camera flashed a motion to Jalen and Mara. A hand, palm flat, mirrored the young woman's grip on the metal seam. The young woman paused with her hand on the outer ring. For a moment her fingers and the inner palm lined up across layers of glass and seal. The crowd below went oddly quiet, like a sea where the wind stops. Someone began to cry. Someone began to pray. The guardians tightened their shields. A drone commander hovered in front of Mara's screen. He wanted orders. The council ran messages faster than speech. People in power made loud. Sudden choices. Lock the halls. Authorize non-lethal force. Demand the Liberators step back. Everyone wanted certainty. No one had it. The young woman closed her eyes and lowered her head. She had come with rage, but now her face showed another thing, a soft wonder and then fear. Her fingers did not move. The inner palm slowly copied a single gesture, a fold of two fingers into the shape of a small point. It was not like mimicry. It was something else, a deliberate sign. It looked like a greeting and like a question at the same time. Mara felt a chill that had little to do with weather. She thought of the weight code Jalen had found in the marks. She thought of the old voice that had said, "Remember." Now the containment was answering not with sound but with shape. Someone in the crowd shouted that the inner motion meant danger. Another voice said it meant peace. Both voices were loud and wrong. The cameras on the square caught the debate. News feeds selected the loudest angles. The city's feeds pulled in governments from other systems, each with their own rules and fear. 1,000 hands wanted to touch the containment and make it mean what they needed. Jalen found himself replaying the hidden feed over and over. He and Mara watched the two palms, one outside and one inside, move in slow time. He paused on a frame where the inner gesture looked like a small map etched in dust, lines and dots, a simple shape that suggested path. Jalen did not know the language, but he felt the logic. The inner hand was not copying for fun. It was pointing. It was trying to show. Mara made a choice. She could call in the council and let them smash the seal to remove threat. She could let the Liberators force the outer ring open in a public lie of victory. Or she could ask for calm and ask for translation. Her voice felt thin on the line. She called the museum loudspeaker and asked the crowd to stop pushing. She asked them to give the team time. The police sounded small against the shouting. An activist at the edge of the crowd heard her and laughed. Time? You had time to hide them. He shouted back. Now you have nothing. Still, some in the crowd listened. Some children stopped and watched the two hands as if watching ants. The moment held like a breath. Inside the containment, a mark in the dust brightened where the inner palm had pressed. It looked like a shape someone had drawn to lead the way. The hidden camera caught the pattern. Jalen zoomed until the lines filled the screen. He whispered, "It's a map or a name. It's both." Mara could not read it. She only felt the weight of the hour. The museum had been built to keep history safe. Now history moved with its own small voice and made a single demand, to be heard on its own terms. The crowd pushed again. The guardians readied force. The liberators pulled ropes. The young woman on the ladder did not move her hand. She kept it steady like a question. The inner palm lay flat, patient and small. At the control room, Mara typed one final note into the locked archive. Containment contact, visual map. Recommend control translation team. Emergency council response pending. Then she pressed send and watched the message leave her screen into the slow machine of law. Outside, the night boiled. Inside, two palms stayed pressed near each other. The gesture had stopped being a simple copy. It had become a message waiting to be answered. The scientists came quietly in the dawnlight. They stepped from vans with careful hands and soft boots. They wore old-style coats and carried small machines wrapped in cloth. The council had sent them with orders: study the marks, prove nothing dangerous, and leave a paper trail. But the city shouted outside, and the cameras fed on every small move. Inside the museum, silence felt hard to keep. Jalen worked with them. He moved like someone who knew the museum's hidden paths. He carried a bag of parts, old coils, a thin speaker, and a tape reader that still smelled faintly of oil. He set the tools on a table in the back lab that had not seen a crowd in years. Mara watched him set the coil in the thin microphone, remembering the probe that had shown a faint heartbeat. She felt the old rules push at her. Do not awake what was asleep, but part of her wanted to know what had answered with fog and a hand. The lead scientist was a woman with steady eyes. She said little and read many files quickly. She placed a small sensor near the glass where the inner mark had been. The sensor hummed once like a throat clearing. It did not speak to the main network. No alarm should find it. They had learned the lesson of the council long ago. Listening must be done in shadow. Jalen connected his coil to the old tape reader. He asked for the archive to be unlocked to a single channel. The councilman in the room watched with paper hands. He had the power to cut the experiment and to call for closure. His mouth was a thin line. The coil pulled the tiny dust marks into a pattern like a sound map. Lines and scratches became notes on a screen. Jalen tapped them, and a low noise came through the speaker. It sounded not like a voice, but like something trying to wake. The tone rose and felt like someone calling across a long valley. Mara felt the room change. The light over the lab seemed duller. The museum's old metal bones creaked like something stretching. The containment's inner darkness shifted, slow as a tide. They played the pattern again. This time the old speaker imitated the marks differently. The noise became a rhythm with gaps like breath. The lead scientist rewound and played it at different speeds. Her fingers moved like a translator trying to read ancient hands. Jalen leaned close, his mouth dry. He had worked on translation project before. The pattern carried a logic he had seen in old weight codes. Sound patterns used to call units from crybeds in long wars. Weight codes were outlawed for a reason. They could make sleeping things turn toward a call. The coil's noise matched the dust marks, and then changed to fit another shape. The containment answered by turning on its pale safety lights. One by one, inner bulbs glowed like small moons. The display cases inside the inner chamber lit in a soft blue. For the first time in living memory, the little objects in the containment showed color. The faded poster, the bicycle's dented handle, the child's shoe with scuffed toe. A recorded voice played, old and rough with time. It was not the museum's public voice. It had been stored long ago and hidden deep in the containment's archive. The voice was translated by the scientist's device into broken modern speech. The first clear word was simple but heavy. Remember, the small translation device did not make the word tidy. It left grainy edges. Still, the sound pushed into the room and made the team stop breathing right. The councilman dropped his paper like a stone. Jalen's fingers went cold on a wire. Mara felt her chest tighten. "Who put that there?" The councilman whispered, but no one answered. The voice had been stored in containment itself, like a message folded into the walls. It was as if someone had left a note for the future in a place where the future might open it like a book. The word remember was both plea and command. Jalen tapped the screen. A ripple of other noises followed. Clicks, a soft metallic scrape, a noise like fabric shifting. The sensors that had been off for decades began to tick in the small lab. Humidity meters, slow motion shutters, an old heartbeat recorder that the council had buried in law. The items in the inner chamber were not just displays. They were arranged with care, as if someone expected guests who would need context. Little labels in a dead language sat by the bowl and the book, and even by a small toy soldier. The lead scientist set the coil to a new frequency. The sound map deepened. The containment responded again, not just lights now, but a sequence of recorded signals. The translation tool built a phrase from a noise that bled through like a stitched ribbon. It was not perfect, but the meaning hit them like cold rain. Wake, listen, open to the one who asks. Mara felt something shift inside her. She had always trusted the rules that told her to study and not disturb. She had followed lists and signs and the safe scripts of guides. Now those rules felt like paper walls. The containment had not been empty. It had been waiting with messages folded into its dust. Outside, the crowd's roar reached a thin note to the museum's thick glass. Inside, the small recorded voice tried again. This time it said a line broken into fragments by time and rust. A translator patch put them together like bricks. They closed us to keep you safe. They closed us to keep us safe. They left us a room to remember. If you wake us, you must also remember why. The councilman swallowed and hit a button to cut the feed, but the cut failed. The containment's recorded line had already been copied into the scientist's device. A dozen small screens showed the word remember in different glyphs. The files would not disappear with one press. Once a voice moves into the air, it spreads. It is not easy to push it back into dark. Someone in the technician group found a small note tucked into the lining of the inner chamber's display. It read in poor handwriting, "For those who return, tell them we were alive, we were afraid, we made mistakes, we sang, we hurt, we healed. Remember both sides." Mara read the sentence twice. The words fit like a broken key. She felt the room tilt toward complicity and away from the tidy stories she had told visitors. The containment had been both jail and archive. It had been a place to keep others safe, and a place to keep a people silent. The Wake Code had not only tried to call a single voice, it had tried to make listeners remember. In the lab, the scientist looked at the councilman. His authority was thin now. He had been told to seal, to quiet, and to control the flow of facts. But the containment had made facts of its own. It had its own voice. It had instructions. Jalen switched off the coil with a slow thumb and let the room fall into a strange quiet. The inner bulbs dimmed. The recorded voice finished with sound like a sigh, and then silence. The team sat with the echo of remember hanging between them. The choice came like a door closing and opening at once. They could obey the council and bury the recordings again, make the museum into a place that taught one clean lesson. Or they could listen and try to translate the rest. To listen would be to let old stories be messy and human and dangerous. To bury would be to repeat the old erasure. Mara looked at Jalen, and then at the lead scientist. Outside, the crowd chanted and the city decided what to fear. Inside, the containment had left a voice folded into dust, asking to be heard. Mara pressed her hand to her tablet and typed one word into the archive. Record. Then she sent the file to a private channel only she and Jalen could open. "Remember," she whispered, not sure she was telling Containment or reminding herself. The small machine on the table blinked its green light and kept the old voice alive. They moved at night because day had become too loud. Cameras and crowds filled the squares. Drones hovered like impatient birds. The small team left through a service door, while most of the city slept or shouted. Mara walked with Jalen, 2 scientists, a security lead, and a council observer. Each of them carried tools and questions. Each of them wore a soft light on their chest, so the cameras would not see too much at once. The interlock was old and heavy. It had a face like a flower of metal. Its keys were thin and careful. Jalen worked the tumblers with hands that did not shake. The security lead watched the corridor and listened to the radio. The scientist kept a small recorder near her belt. Mara felt her throat tight. She had read the notes and seen the films. She had felt the small pulse on the probe. Still, the idea of opening the inner door felt like stepping into a memory you might regret. When the lock turned, the sound was soft and wrong, like a breath moving through dry leaves. The inner door slid. A thin, old light leaked out. It smelled of dust and old oil and something that might have once been soap. The air was cool and sealed. The team stepped inside together. The inner chamber was not what the legends had painted. It was not a ruin of bones and ashes. It was a tidy room. The items were arranged under small lights. Little signs in a dead script sat by bowls and toys. Someone had put care into their placement. A bicycle stood on a stand as if waiting for its rider. The child shoe lay on a blue cloth, cleaned and fixed. The display made the space look like a room someone had left and planned to return to. At the far end of the chamber, on a low platform, a wrapped shape lay under a thin sheet. It had been set like a small altar. The team moved slow. The scientist pressed a hand to her heart, as if to still the rush of blood. Jalen stepped forward and peeled the sheet back. The figure under it was smaller than most of them expected. It was wrapped in old polymer and cloth. Its face was partly covered. When the cloth fell, a human face showed, older than a child but not old. The skin was dry and pale. The eyes were closed like someone sleeping. The chest moved with a slow, steady breath. Mara had never seen a human up close outside records. Images and films had shape, but not the weight of real breathing. The team felt the sound of life like a tide. The council observer's face went white. He swallowed and tried to keep his voice steady. They had tools to test this. Sensors, translators, slow warming lights. Jalen placed a mirror to the figure's mouth. It fogged when the chest rose. The scientist held her recorder close and whispered into the device so it would catch everything. For a long moment, nothing more happened. The team watched and counted heartbeats like sailors counting stars. Outside, the city argued itself into fever. Cameras waited for one small move. Then the figure's hand twitched. It flexed fingers that had not moved in a long time. The body rolled as if waking from a very deep sleep. The eyes opened slowly. They were dark and tired, not what stories had promised. The human looked at the team for a heartbeat. It tried to sit, but stopped, confused by the small world. It made a low sound, not a word, just a breath that held the weight of a long time. The scientist spoke first, gently. "We are friends," she said. "We are here to listen." The human's lips moved. The sound came like a thin twig breaking. A single word left the mouth, and every translator in the room shook to find its place. The council observer heard it in his old language and mouthed it out loud before the translation device could finish. "Why?" The question landed like a stone. It was simple and raw. It did not ask for excuse or for pity. It asked for the reason someone had closed a life away. It asked why people had been wrapped and stored like a bad thing. Mara felt the world tighten around that one syllable. For her, the word was an accusation and also a call. She looked at the notes in her mind. Treaties, warnings, old fears. She looked at the child's shoe on its cloth. She had always told visitors that the containment kept the galaxy safe. Now safety and silence seemed the same thing. The human tried again, and the translator filled the gaps in a thin voice. "Who kept us? Who hit us? Did you remember us? Or only the danger?" Jalen knelt and offered a small glass of water. The human took it clumsily. Its hands were slow but sure. When the water touched lips, the eyes sharpened a fraction. Memory came like a tide with small, broken images. A door, a shout, a fix of light. The human spoke more, but the words came in stabs and needed the scientist's patchwork translation to make sense. We were hidden to stop war, it said in the best patchwork the devices could manage. We were hidden to stop the fire. We slept. We were told to be still. We slept, and then the world forgot how to listen. The team listened and felt the weight of old choices. The council observer tried to write words that would make everything right. He tried to say this was a mistake, an old mess, a problem of their parents. But the human kept asking, why me? Why them? Why close a voice instead of teaching the world to hold its anger? Outside, feeds exploded as the inner camera streamed live. The city found its breath in the human's question. Every screen filled with the small room and the tired eyes that asked why the containment had been built. People argued with new words. Some cried. Some called for retribution. Some asked the council to answer and give proof it had done no wrong. Mara's mouth was dry. She thought of the museum plaques she had read to visitors. Each plaque had a neat moral and a clean ending. Now a real person stood in front of her and asked a question that did not fit into neat endings. She reached forward and placed her hand near the human's. The human looked at her hand and then at her face. For a long second, nothing moved. Then it curled its fingers around Mara's with a small, careful pressure. The gesture felt like a plea to be treated as a person and not as an exhibit. The human's next words were slow and full. If you remember why you closed us, then tell me why you opened the door. Mara did not have a full answer. The team did not have a perfect one. They had only choices to make in that small, bright room. To tell truth and risk chaos, or to hide and keep an old wrong hidden again. The feed from the inner chamber had already reached millions. The containment had been meant to hold the past safe behind glass. Instead, it had become a place where the past asked a simple question. The galaxy waited for the answer. Mara looked at the camera, and then at the human. She could feel the weight of history and the thin line of a new future. She took a breath and said the truth she had always feared to speak. We kept you to be safe, but we forgot that being safe is not the same as being right. Outside, the city noise turned into a low, wondering hum. The human closed its eyes like someone trying to learn a new sound. It said nothing more for a while, watching faces around it and the screens that showed millions watching them in turn. The small room that had once been silent now held the first moments of a long answer. The containment had been built to keep humans in a dark history. Now a human stood in the light and asked the galaxy to remember both the harm and the kindness. The world could no longer pick only one.